Today we're going to look at going through a storm. This is part one of a two-part series. It's 10 years since our son-in-law David Plaisted went to heaven. Oh, how time moves on. To mark this occasion, we are over the next 2 weeks reproducing 2 Langstaff letters written at that time entitled Lessons Learned Going Through a Storm. Have you ever been in a storm, a really big one? I remember years ago ministering in a retreat centre in Wisconsin when it was hit by severe straight-line winds that took down, would you believe it, 1,000 trees, including one adjacent to the room where I was staying. But there are other kinds of storms, the ones that strike our lives and circumstances. The most devastating storms of my life, let me share with you some of them, or rather, the most devastating storm. It began 2 years ago when my son-in-law David Plaisted unexpectedly died. Travelling in America with his son Mitchell, I had just spoken at a national leadership conference when I received the news that received news. It was devastating, not only to me but to all the family and friends. Not long after that, I took sick, was out of action for 3 months, ended up in hospital 4 times, eventually receiving a pacemaker. After that, my daughter Joy had a herniated disc requiring surgery. My wife Dorothy had skin cancer, and more recently PMR. You could say we were going through a storm. This season has been the most devastating time of our lives. But out of all this, I want to share with you some of the lessons I have learned going through a storm. First, I learned about grief. You know, I thought I knew about grief, what it was like, but I really didn't. Even though I'd been in ministry 50 years and ministered to many people in their time of grief, I had never felt the pain and anguish of grief like I did through all of this. David was, as a friend observed, like the son I never had. We also had a vision for David to become the pastor of the church I was leading at the time, and I would be his assistant. That vision died with him. I grieved his going from us. I personally discovered it's not wrong to grieve. Indeed, it is unhealthy not to. Isaiah 53:3 tells us that Jesus was acquainted with grief. At Lazarus' death, it is stated he wept. You have to grieve in a healthy way. You recognize you never get over it, but you do get through it. It is a process and it takes time. You have to be patient with God and patient with yourself. Remember Paul's admonition in 1 Thessalonians 4:13. Concerning those who have fallen asleep, in other words, they've died, lest you sorrow as others do who have no hope. Yes, we grieve, but we have the sure and certain hope of being reunited in heaven above. Secondly, I learned that God is with you in the storm. God is faithful, for he himself has said, I will never leave you or forsake you. The words actually go back to Deuteronomy 31:7 and 8. Be strong and of good courage, and the Lord is the one who goes before you. He will be with you, and he will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not fear or be dismayed. Those were Moses' words to Joshua at the end of his life. You know, the older I get, the more I appreciate and depend upon the faithfulness of God. So I declared that even if I do not understand all that is happening or why, I will trust God anyway, because he is faithful and true. Number 3, I was reminded to get a godly perspective on life. When I took sick and my wife was told by the cardiologist, you know, quote, he just may take a nap and never wake up. I was reminded about a wonderful passage I heard Marilyn Hickey preach in Dr. Cho's church in Seoul, Korea, based on the word, For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, is working for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. What have I got to complain about? This light affliction? It's only for a moment compared to the glory that awaits us in eternity. We have to see our lives against the background of eternity. Number 4. I was reminded that all things work together for good. At the Omega Team annual conference shortly after David's death, James Goll gave a powerful message that came out of the death of his own wife. He shared these 3 confessions. 1, God is good all the time. 2, all things work together for good. And 3, the best is yet to come. At the time he was still working on that one. It's similar to what I always say, the best is yet to be. I believe it. Many Christians have a superficial understanding of the goodness of God. It is much deeper than most believers have tapped into. Maybe you're going through a grief at this time. Hold on to God, and he will bring you through the storm. God bless you.
Thank you for listening to the Langstaff Letter with Dr. Alan Langstaff. The Langstaff Letter is produced by Frontline Ministries, a ministry of Kairos Ministries. If you'd like to join a discussion about this edition, you can go to Dr. Langstaff's blog at kairosmin.org. We look forward to having you join us back again next week. And remember, the best is yet to be.